first question. Do you consider yourself a nationalist?
What do you mean by nationalist?
Well, then
No.
you can... And what's nationalism for you?
I mean, do I love my country? Yes. Do I want my country to sort of transpose its will on other countries? No.
So you are a nationalist.
Okay.
Good. What differences do you see between sort of American nationalism and Latin nationalism?
Well, I mean, nationalism in the United States is different than all different nationalisms because it seems to me like people in the United States are less well informed about other countries. And so there's a sort of geographic, cultural ignorance by the average American, which I don't think that other countries have. Maybe because of the size or the isolation between two oceans. But I think that American nationalism is sort of spiced with ignorance of world affairs and geography. And what that means is that there's a lot of sort of erroneous perceptions by the average American. And so their nationalism is based on, I think, a lot of misinformation. Now, certainly there's a small group of Americans who travel and they're highly educated, who are aware of other cultures and other people, but the average, whatever that means, American, hasn't traveled as much and doesn't know, or hasn't lived in other countries and doesn't know people from other cultures. Whereas in Latin America, I think because the countries are smaller and people tend to have more awareness of people from other countries, and so their nationalism is in that sense more informed because they know about other nations. So I would say, in brief, that American nationalism is less informed compared to Latin American nationalism.
Okay. And, well, what problems do you see related to these nationalism issues?
American nationalism?
Between American and Latin?
Well, I mean, between American and Latin. Well, I don't think Americans understand Latins very well. I mean, the average American doesn't know what it's like to live in Mexico and be Mexican. There's too much misinformation and stereotypes. And so that's problematic. Even someone like the ambassador to Mexico, I think, is not very well informed of what it's like to really live in Mexico. On the other hand, it seems like, let's talk about Mexico, the average Mexican probably knows a lot more about the United States than the average American knows about Mexico. A lot of Mexicans travel, vacation, or even live and work legally or illegally in the United States. And if not, a lot of them live on the borders. So I think they're more aware of American culture and America than Americans are of Mexicans. In that sense, their nationalism is more well-informed, more enlightened. Now, you could talk about indigenous Mexicans that live in the South that have never visited the United States, but at least through television or radio, they probably know more about American culture than Americans do about Mexican culture.
Well, and...
so there's a problem of misunderstanding, I think, principally on the part of Americans.
And how... do you have a viable solution for that, an idea of a viable solution to these problems?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a viable solution. First, my sort of personal dream is that an American president or somebody with a lot of power focuses more on Mexico and Latin America rather than Europe or some other part of the world. And I think that if one day when we have an American president or somebody important who says, you know what, my priority is going to be Mexico or my priority is going to be Latin America, and they speak fluent Spanish and they've lived in Mexico and they make that a priority, then I think once somebody takes that first step on the part of the United States, that relations will open up and problems of nationalism will cease to be as great as they are right now. I mean, obviously, on the Latin side, the Latin presidents and leaders are open to and know a lot about the United States, but I don't think that the American politicians and leaders are open to and know a lot about Mexico. So one day, when that happens, I think things will change, and until that, I don't think much will change.
Okay, and well, the last question, and sort of in retrospective to the whole interview, do you think the American nationalism is logical, since the USA is a multi-ethnic, multicultural country?
Well, I don't think you can talk about logic because it's all misinformed, it's misunderstanding. So if there's any sort of logic to it, it's misinformed, illogical logic. So I don't think that term applies. It's, I mean, you can do something logical when the information is correct or understandable, but I don't think most Americans have good information about the other nations, and therefore their sense of what it means to be American is so misinformed that it's probably not useful to talk about whether it's logical or not. But I see what you're getting at, multicultural society, and then maybe the xenophobia of other countries or misunderstanding. Yeah, it doesn't make sense on the surface, but if you live and work in American culture, one of the great things about it is, yes, it has all these other people from other places, but it adapts them, and they adapt themselves very quickly. And so while I think it's not possible to talk about an Irish person living in the United States, there's Irish Americans, because they adapt within one generation, they adapt so quickly, and there's something new. In that sense, they themselves are then part of the misinformed, unique culture, and so it's not fair really to say that, well, there's these different cultures. How could they have this sense of nationalism and unity? Well, yes, there's different cultures, but it's different and it's the same. It's something very unique in the world. I think that these different cultures are all there, but they adapt so quickly. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's a big difference between Chicanos, Mexicans living in the United States, or Mexican Americans, and Mexicans. They're not the same. Their cultures, I think, are different. And you could say the same thing for people Hindus living in India, and Indian Americans who are Hindus living in Chicago. I think that they have trouble understanding each other, even one generation removed. So you have young Pakistani or Indian people born in Chicago, and their parents might be able to go back to Pakistan or India and understand the culture, but their children have trouble. It's foreign to them. They are more American after one generation than they are of what other culture. So that question of, well, isn't that sort of illogical, or isn't that that doesn't make sense that they should be that way? I think maybe that's misunderstanding what it means to be part of American culture. Once you've lived there or for a long period of time, you become part of it and you see things like America. I think it's very rare to see a culture where they've lived in the United States for a really long time and they still don't feel American. You talk to Mexicans who've lived there 20 years and then they feel very much American, and they come back to Mexico and that's sort of the foreign thing, not the United States, I think. I'm not a sociologist, so I don't know, but for sure, but that's how I feel. So it's not a question of logic, it's just it's a weird situation that's full of misinformation and this unique cultural quality, and but it creates lots of problems, and I think that's what you're getting at.
Well, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.